to ask anyone attending remotely to mute yourself when not contributing so that we don't pick up any background noise or feedback. And as usual, I would remind all of those in attendance to ensure that your mobile phones are either on silent mode or switched off entirely. Members attending remotely are reminded of the constitutional requirements that in order to participate in public meetings, they must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex. And the witnesses who are with us today, as you're within the precincts of Leinster House, you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the presentation you make to this committee. This means that you have an absolute defence against any defamation action for anything you may say at the meeting. However, you're expected not to abuse this privilege, and it's my duty as Cathaoirleach of the committee to ensure that this privilege is not abused. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with any such direction. Members are also reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person or entity outside of the Houses or of an official of the Houses, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So the item on today's agenda for today's meeting is inclusive education, allocation, roles and training needs of special education teachers, SETs and special needs assistants, SNAs. I'd like to warmly welcome on behalf of the committee, from the Parents' Council we have Ms Anya Lynch, CEO, Ms Carmel O'Shea, Advocacy Services Manager, Mr Facundo Furtado, Voice, Influence and Inclusive Officer, and from Save SNAs we're joined by Ms Jesslyn Henry. So Dr Niall Muldoon, Ombudsman for Children, declined the invitation as he is attending an international conference. All of his senior management team also had important commitments, so regrettably they can't be with us. So I'm now going to call on our witnesses to make their opening statements in the following order. We'll begin with Ms O'Shea, and then following that we'll have Ms Henry. So you have 5 minutes each, and following that we'll have questions from the members. So over to you, Ms O'Shea. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share the views of parents on the special education teachers and special needs assistants. The findings we will be discussing are based on the results of a survey conducted by the National Parents' Council in June 2026. The NPC sent the survey to all parents on its mailing list who had given their consent to receive such invitations. The survey was open from the 9th of June to the 15th of June. Firstly, I'd like to thank the 791 parents who took the time to participate in the survey. The high level of engagement demonstrates how important educational supports are to families and reflects parents' commitment to ensuring that all children can access the support they need to thrive in school. The purpose of this survey was to better understand parents' experiences and views of special education teachers, commonly known as SETs, and the special needs assistants or SNAs. We asked parents about the role these supports play in schools, whether current allocation models are working effectively, and what training and qualifications parents believe are necessary to meet the increasingly diverse needs of children. With regard to SETs, one of the clearest findings from the survey is the value parents place on special education teachers. Parents overwhelmingly describe SETs as essential in helping children access learning, build confidence, develop independence and participate fully in school life. Many parents highlighted the positive impact that SET support has had on their child's academic progress, emotional well-being and overall school experience. Parents are very positive with the amount of SET support available to their child, with just over 63% of parents saying they're very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with the level of support provided. However, when asked about the allocation of SET supports, parents expressed concerns. While many acknowledge that schools are doing their best within the resources available, there was a strong view that the level of support available is often insufficient to meet demand. Parents spoke about limited access to support, reduced support hours, and concerns that children can struggle for long periods before receiving assistance. Many felt that support should be allocated on the basis of individual need and that current arrangements do not always reflect the reality of children's experiences in school. The survey also explored parents' views on the training and qualifications of special education teachers. More than two-thirds of respondents felt that SETs should hold additional specialist qualifications beyond their initial teaching degree. Parents also expressed strong support for ongoing professional development, particularly in areas such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, emotional regulation and inclusive education practices. Many parents felt that the increasing complexity of needs within schools requires specialist expertise and continuous learning. These findings align closely with feedback received through NPC's recent consultation on the review of the CAME Standards for Initial Teacher Education. In that consultation, parents consistently identified special education and inclusive education as areas requiring greater emphasis within initial teacher education. Parents expressed concern that many newly qualified teachers are not adequately prepared to support children with additional needs and called for mandatory practical training in areas such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia and neurodiversity. Parents also highlighted the importance of ensuring that all teachers, not only those working in specialist roles, have the knowledge and confidence to support children with additional needs in mainstream classrooms. Furthermore, parents strongly supported greater placement opportunities during initial teacher education in special classes and special schools, believing that direct experience of diverse educational settings is essential in preparing teachers to meet the needs of all learners, and recognising that as an NQT they may be working in any of these settings as a first teaching job. Taken together, both consultations point to a clear message from parents. Specialist supports such as SETs are critically important, but inclusion is the responsibility of the entire education system. Parents want all teachers to graduate with a strong understanding of special education needs and inclusive practice, while also ensuring that specialist staff have access to advanced qualifications and ongoing professional development. The findings related to special needs assistance were equally strong. Parents overwhelmingly recognise the important contributions SNAs make to children's educational experiences. They described SNAs as providing support that extends beyond care needs and includes emotional regulation, communication, social development, participation in learning and inclusion in school life. Many parents highlighted the trusting relationships that children develop with SNAs and the positive impact these relationships can have on confidence, well-being and engagement in education. Parents are very positive about the role of the SNA, with 76% saying that the role either fully meets their child's needs or it meets their needs but could be improved. When considering the allocation of SNA supports, parents again raised concerns. Almost half of the respondents felt that the current allocation model is not fair, while many others indicated that they were unsure how the system operates. Parents frequently raise concerns about the availability of support, the sharing of SNAs between multiple children, and the ability of the current model to respond to increasingly diverse needs. Many parents felt that some children would benefit from greater access to one-to-one support and expressed concern that resources are often stretched too thinly across schools. The responses also revealed a degree of confusion regarding how SNA allocation decisions are made. Some parents appeared unclear about the respective roles of schools, the NCSE, and the allocation process itself. This suggests that alongside concerns about resources, there may also be a need for clearer communication and greater transparency around how supports are allocated and the factors that influence those decisions. The survey also examined parents' views on the training requirements for SNAs. Parents consistently expressed support for additional specialist training and ongoing professional development. Many highlighted the need for expertise in areas such as autism, ADHD, communication difficulties, sensory processing and emotional regulation. Parents recognise that SNAs are supporting children with increasingly complex needs and felt that access to relevant training is essential if they are to continue carrying out this role effectively. As part of this consultation, we also asked for the views of parents whose children do not currently receive SET or SNA support. The response was that these parents strongly recognise the value of these roles. They acknowledge the positive impact that SETs and SNAs have not only on individual children, but also on classrooms, teachers and school communities as a whole. This reinforces the view that educational supports benefit all learners and contribute to more inclusive and effective school environments. The findings suggest that parents want to see sufficient resources to ensure children can access supports when they need it, clear and transparent allocation systems that are understood by families, and ongoing investment in training and professional development for both SETs and SNAs. Finally, the survey demonstrates that parents see special education teachers and special needs assistants as fundamental to the delivery of inclusive education. While there is strong support for the professionals working within the system, there is also a clear message that continued investment, greater clarity and enhanced training will be needed to ensure that every child can reach their full potential. Thank you, and we look forward to discussing the findings with you.
Thank you very much, Ms O'Shea. So now, Ms Jesson, Henry, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me along. Inclusion means belonging, a feeling of safety and security. Somewhere where you can be yourself, where you're not made to feel othered, not enough, weird or strange for being yourself. That's all any of us want. To feel safe, to feel that we belong. Inclusion is not putting all children into a classroom and hoping for the best. It's providing supports, services, therapies, and even staff who do not understand a child's needs. Inclusion is meeting every child where they are at. It is focusing their education on their abilities, not their disabilities. So whether that is a special class, a special school, a mainstream classroom with SNA support, or a child whose goals are learning to pack their school bag, eat their lunch independently, or achieve 625 points in the Leaving Cert, our education system must be able to cater for them all and treat every child with dignity and respect. We should be cheering on every milestone, whatever that may be. Education is a human right. Safety is a fundamental psychological need. Unfortunately, though, for far too long, our system has been failing far too many children. No parent should have to take the state to court for services, a school place, or even a diagnosis. Yet that's exactly what's happening. This is not an inclusive environment. The right to an inclusive education is not simply an aspiration. It is recognised in national and international law. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities states that children with disabilities have the right to access an inclusive education system and to participate fully in their communities. Here in Ireland, the Education for Persons with Special Educational Needs Act and our own Department of Education policies commit us to supporting children to learn and thrive in the least restrictive environment possible. But rights on paper mean very little if they are not matched with action in practice. True inclusion requires investment. It requires timely assessments, access to therapies, appropriate school placements and adequate resources. It requires classrooms where children are supported, understood and valued. Most importantly, it requires a workforce that is equipped with the knowledge and skills to meet increasingly diverse needs. Teachers and special needs assistants are at the heart of inclusive education, yet many will tell you that they did not receive enough specialist training. According to the 2019 ASTI Red Sea survey, only 22% of members surveyed said that they had received SEN training. We cannot expect educators to support children with complex communication needs, autism, ADHD, intellectual disabilities, sensory differences, mental health challenges and behavioural needs without providing them with the tools to do so effectively. Initial teacher education and ongoing professional development must place inclusion at their centre. Teachers need practical training in differentiated learning, positive behaviour supports, communication strategies, sensory regulation and trauma-informed practice. They need confidence in adapting teaching methods so that every child can access learning in a meaningful way. The Relate framework developed by the NCSE is arguably the best guidelines issued in education, but needs to be adequately funded and resourced throughout the system so that teachers and SNAs are adequately trained in regulation-first practices. Similarly, SNAs deserve high-quality continuous professional development that recognises the vital role they play in supporting students' care, independence, participation and well-being. SNAs should be empowered through training and collaboration to work as valued members of the education team, not simply as additional adults in the room. Inclusion cannot depend on the goodwill of individual teachers, SNAs or parents fighting for supports. It must be embedded within the entire education system. It must be planned for, funded and prioritised. When inclusion is done well, it benefits everyone. Children learn empathy, respect and understanding. Diversity becomes something to celebrate rather than fear. Schools become communities where differences are not barriers but strengths. Every child deserves to walk into a school knowing they are welcome, valued and safe. Every child deserves an education that recognises their potential. And every family deserves to know that their child's rights will be upheld without having to battle the system to access them. And a truly inclusive society is one that ensures every child has the opportunity not just to attend school, but to belong there.
Thank you very much, Ms Henry. Really appreciate all of you being here this morning. This afternoon, I should say. We're now going to members' questions. There'll be 6 minutes per member. I allow a little overrun, usually of 30 seconds or so, but we do need to keep within time constraints, and you might hear the glass tapping every so often, which just means to wrap up and conclude. So it's 6 minutes per member, and I ask the members just give adequate time for our witnesses to respond as well. We'll begin today with Deputy Aisling Dempsey. Thank you.
And thank you to all the witnesses for being here and for delivering your opening statements. Ms Henry, if I could start with you, please. And thank you. There was a lot of impactful statements that you've just done there, that when you read you can't help but picture the children that you're talking about, so thank you for that. But I suppose, look, there was no disagreement in this room, I think, when SNA reductions were announced, that you know, it was a shame, it was very hurtful and stressful for families and for school communities as a whole. It was very, very poorly handled, but I suppose what it did was spur on a lot of the work that had been promised in relation to SNAs, you know, kind of the professionalisation of them and the redeployment scheme, things like that. And I believe you've broadly welcomed that, but could you give me just a bit of detail on that? What are you happy with, what are you not happy with, and where do you think the work that's being done will take us to in terms of getting, I suppose, to our ultimate goal of fully inclusive school environments?
It's absolutely a positive that the circular has been expanded. It looks very much like a day-to-day role of an SNA that we actually do on a day-to-day basis. It's fantastic to see that the model is now moving away from primary and secondary care needs as such and more to core needs. And it's very positive that those now include communication, regulation, because they are ultimately what we strive to meet every single day and were never recognised before. Absolutely, in terms of some of the SNA's issues, obviously, you know, there's some of the workers' relation stuff that isn't fully there yet. It absolutely isn't, but I mean, professionalisation of the role and moving it to a level 6 is a huge opportunity for SNAs, for the children that we work with, and for the families to be able to trust that the people looking after their children are educated to a standard that can help.
And is there a concern amongst the SNAs about getting to that level 6? Like, what percentage of SNAs are already at that level, and will they be helped to achieve it if they're not?
I'm not fully aware of the percentage at the moment. I do know Forsa did a survey of members a number of years ago and did have those figures, but a huge amount of SNAs already have level 6. So I teach SNA courses at level 5, 6 and 7. I actually developed one of the level 7 courses and defended it with QQI. So, you know, we see SNAs all of the time coming in to reach that standard anyway. And in all fairness, it is very rare that a school would hire anybody that doesn't have that level of qualification, as it is. We want the best people possible in our schools looking after our most vulnerable students. So the SNAs are purposely going out there and getting those qualifications themselves.
Thank you. Ms. O'Shea, if I could ask you, please, in terms of the SETs, the special education teachers, like, I think every teacher should have at least a basic or a grounding education in, you know, when they're doing their training in this area, in special ed and inclusion. But I suppose we're asking a lot of our teachers these days, they're constantly being asked to do more with, you know, just evolution, I suppose, of the school environment. But what qualification do you think they need to do? Is it a master's? Is it an additional module? Like, how extensive would the training be that would be needed to have a SET?
Yeah, I might just come in there. I mean, I think we do ask a lot of our teachers, but we've also committed to an inclusive education system. So I think that's the base level, is that children should be able to get the supports wherever they are in the education system. So that's kind of that. All teachers need that overall basic initial teacher education. And although that has been improved recently, we still feel it needs to be improved more. 2 weeks placement isn't enough when you see the range of needs that teachers are working with. So first of all, I think we need to improve our initial teacher education to make sure that all teachers can support all children in the education system. I think then, in terms of additionality, I think what we're suggesting and what parents have told us, that if teachers are working in specialist placements like a special class or a special school, that they should have additional education for that. I think there needs to be a review of that. As sitting here saying, oh, it should be a master's level, I think there needs to be a proper exploration of that, because certain teachers will specialise in certain areas of provision and work in certain classes or certain schools. So I think there needs to be a framework that means that teachers can get the qualifications and the education that they need, depending on the setting that they're working in, that requires additional training. So I think there needs to be like a real review, rather than just saying, well, we need a master's or we need a postgraduate or we need a one-year course or whatever. I think the length of it will come when we know what needs to be included in it, because I think the needs of children are growing. I think also the other difficulty is that a lot of the specialist settings currently have very newly qualified teachers working in them. So they're coming sometimes straight from their initial teacher education, working in specialist settings, and then being supported by teachers who don't have additional education in the area. So you've got this kind of very difficult situation of trying to support children, sometimes with very complex needs, without that additional understanding of what those needs are and how to adapt curriculum and everything else to it.
And that review is ongoing at the moment.
I'm not sure. I don't think it. No, I don't think so. I think that's something that we would suggest would need to happen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Deputy Darna Work, 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much to the witnesses. The National Parents Council specifically referenced, both in relation to SNAs and SETs, some questions in relation to the allocation process, how it's done. Could you expand on that, what parents are saying, and what they would like to see, or if you have recommendations in that regard? Is it about more inclusion? Is it about greater involvement in the decision-making process, or is it greater transparency in how decisions are made?
I think all of that. So one of the issues they raise is that they don't really understand how the allocation process works, and maybe how their child didn't get an allocation and other children in the school did. So I think transparency around how those decisions are made and involving their voice is really important. I think one of the other things that came up through SET and SNA was also allocations, was also the fact that some children who may not be presenting openly with difficulties are the last ones to get support, whereas their needs may be just as great. And I think that piece of children who I suppose are struggling most to regulate in a setting are requiring more support. So children are often going without support if they're not presenting like that. So and parents are then saying that actually their child has to deteriorate so much before they do get support, whereas if they'd got early intervention supports, they might never needed to have had the level of support that they needed in the end. But certainly parents want to be more involved in those conversations. Ultimately, the principal needs to make the decision about the allocations in the school, and parents would respect that. But I think parents want to be involved in the conversations before that, have an opportunity to talk about their child's needs as they see them, and what their child needs.
And in terms of, is it the same picture for SETs as it is for SNAs, or is it different? And then, the perspective. Yeah,
I mean, I think the important thing to say is the survey really showed that a lot of parents are happy with the allocations. So, I mean, I think we had 63% in set saying they were either completely happy or they were happy but required a bit more, and 76% in SNAs. So that's we were quite shocked with that level of support for what children were getting.
And you think parents recognise the distinct and separate roles and related roles in relation to
they would when we're working with them and talking with them, not just in the survey but more generally, they would be quite aware of the type of support that their child gets in the school on most occasions. Not always, but on most occasions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Henry, to say, and it was mentioned earlier, I think it's very fair to say that in the wake of the SNA debacle at the government's hands, there was a massive public response from parents, from whole school communities, from campaigners like yourselves, and I am firmly of the opinion that we wouldn't have made the type of progress that we have made without that effort, and to commend as well, the SNAs themselves and their representative organisations. How do you reflect on where we are now and where all of that effort, where you would like to for it to take us, and what are the key kind of indicators that you would like to see on the back of this process? Obviously, there's an industrial relations process where there's a consultation and a ballot in relation to that, and that's for the people involved. But as a campaign group, as a stakeholder in the area, what will be the key indicators of success arising out of these recent months?
I think the biggest success, I suppose, at the moment is the fact that we do have that new circular now. We do have those core needs expanded so that it's not just toileting, feeding and medical needs. We're actually addressing a huge array of needs that we are working with on a daily basis, and the allocation model being based off that now will see a whole load of children that wouldn't have previously had support get that support. So that's an absolute win in all of this. What I would like to see happen is a bigger kind of discussion around inclusive education. Have parents, teachers, SNAs and people like yourselves all sitting down together to actually discuss what an inclusive education system looks like and how we can push it forward, how we can address the issues surrounding therapies, diagnosis, allocation, all of those things that are so important to all of us. Both in all of us in the school community and the parents and the wider families of those children that we're trying to support. So that would be the biggest thing that I think we need to see happen.
And the Minister has indicated the last time we had a PMB in the Dáil in relation to this that she will establish a forum. Do you think that has the basis of advancing these types of conversations?
Yeah, I do. I just think that the forum will absolutely have to have representatives from across across everybody, because if it leaves out one voice, it's useless.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Peter Roach.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Thanks very much, and you're most welcome. And I think this conversation or engagement is critical, and I think the deficits that are out there need to be constantly highlighted. And in more recent times, I suppose, when it came to the summer programme of what was the July provision, quite insulting that the portal was only open for 6 days. Now, I know that was corrected, but no teacher, no school should have to be firefighting with an educational system to cater for the most vulnerable. And one such school that I had liaison or engagement with in that regard, they when the portal reopened, they applied and were successful. And I took it upon myself last Monday to visit that very facility, that's St. Charlotte's College in Tuam. And there were 10 students who they benefited from the scheme or the summer programme. And I'm telling you that whether it be St. Charlotte's in Tuam or any other school right around the country, it would do anyone good that has any doubt or suspicion about the value of SEN and SAT. Mother of God, it was compelling to see and understand what it is that those children were doing as part of that programme. No exaggeration, they were being taught how to do CPR, first aid, and everything pertaining to the basic skills of how you interact with someone if there's an injury, burn or otherwise. I got to know and understand the circumstances of most of those children, and of course also the teaching staff. And I came away with one clear message, and that it was the department or whoever should never tamper with a process that does such magical things for in people's lives. And whilst we were there for the best part of 2 hours, I was astonished to see the level of love that the SENs were giving and the interaction and the way that they were responding. And the parents who, in most cases, probably at home or maybe at part-time work, deserving a break rather than being constantly worrying about who's going to provide an education for my child. That was the thing I came away with. And, you know, talking to the SEN, one girl in particular she's transitioning from, you might say, mainstream into SEN teaching training. And she had done her master's. And what I found really, I suppose, surprising was that there was no module while she was doing her training and doing her master's degree. There was no module to cater for SEN at all. I thought that's kind of unusual because I would feel, and I don't want to add an extra burden to teachers who aren't into that level of work, but I thought it was maybe a weakness in the system whereby all teachers wouldn't have an understanding as to the needs of those special children. I don't know if there's any reason to believe it's going to happen in the future, but I thought that was a deficit. But I have to say that it annoys me no end when I understand, and I have no question to ask you, by the way, just a comment, and maybe you have a comment to pass when I'm done. There is a perception, in my belief, there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that somehow or another when a school applies for an SEN or the summer programme, that somehow or another they're not being truthful about the needs. And they shouldn't have to make an application on that basis and expect a refusal. And then the advice they are given at that time is to appeal the decision. Now, if there isn't enough trust with the department officials to take at face value what the application is asking for and run with that, because if we continue to tamper with what should be a brilliant model in terms of inclusion, then we're losing it because you're excluding the people that need the greatest assistance in life. People that don't have those disabilities or they're disadvantaged in that way, they'll manage just fine. But for the love of God, let's stop making it complicated and stop antagonising the teaching staff, and let's be fair about the way that the process works. In 25 seconds, folks, if any of you want to respond to that, but I was just taken by the experience, and I would strongly appeal to people that wouldn't be familiar with it, go and do it because it's just remarkable.
I'd have to agree with you. The process has been way too difficult for schools. I've seen a school close to where I live who has had to put a business case together so that they can have extra SNAs at their summer provision programme, it's crazy. And the fact that it wasn't open for very long didn't help. I know that was corrected again, but we're going to see very many children that are not going to be able to participate because it was announced too late and schools weren't able to get staff together to provide it. So we're going to see children missing out. So I would agree with you on that. And it's really, really important to have the programme.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can I just make a quick comment more, not about the summer, but more about the generalised about applying for SNAs? And I think, I agree with you, but I think there's also a piece where if as a society or as a government there's a finite budget currently, so unless that changes, then we have to make sure that the children with the most need have the support. So unless it's an open-ended budget, we have to make some decisions, and it's how we make those decisions that I think are really important. And some of the parents in our survey were saying, because my child doesn't have such an obvious need, they get left to the last, but actually they have greater needs. So I think it's how we make the decisions, or we just have an open-ended budget, which I don't think is ever going to happen. So I think we do have to be realistic that there is a budget for this, so we need to make sure that the allocations happen properly. And reviews are had. I completely agree with everybody here that the review, the last time was done too quickly at the wrong time and everything else that was going on. But we have to have reviews because needs in schools change. And if we've got children with great needs in this school, but allocations haven't been changed when another school haven't got the same needs as they had maybe 2 years ago, then these children are missing out. So some of these very difficult decisions and very difficult processes, if we don't have an open-ended budget, becomes a problem.
I'll actually let you back in 1 second, Rania, but just to be fair with the clock, I'm actually the next speaker.
Okay.
So, no, it's not. I'm happy to reset the clock and let you just continue that point for a minute, because I think it's actually very important if you would like to, but just to be fair to all the members with the time. If we reset the
I think I've probably made the point, but I mean, it is just that sometimes we have these conversations where we're looking at what we want for children, but if there's a budget set, we can only provide within that budget. And I think sometimes societal and government decisions need to be made rather than it be looking at what schools did or didn't get, because that's all within the budgetary process. And children with the greatest need to have the most support. So it's the point, yeah.
Thank you very much. But just go, and first and foremost, you're all very welcome today, and thank you very much for your input. I found the opening statements very informative, and even answering the questions so far. I'm sure you're answering questions that we were all potentially looking to ask at one stage or another there. Jessalyn, just in your opening statement there, and it's just to read it out after what Pete just said, but under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, it states that children with disabilities have the right to access an inclusive education system and to participate fully in their communities. And here in Ireland, the Education for Persons with Special Education Needs Act and our own Department of Education policies commit us to supporting children to learn and thrive in the least restrictive environment possible. So we can talk about budgets and we can talk about Department of Public Expenditure, but in this particular room, we're talking about the supports that are delivered for children. And I'd wholeheartedly support what Deputy Roach has just said in relation to that. I was happy to hear, Jason, you mentioned there in one of your responses, first of all about the training, but you're saying the communication has improved. And going back to the earlier part of this year, I think that was the element that was very much missing. The message, the whole messaging broke badly, and we were all caught on the hop based on the message getting out there. So it's good to hear that's improving, but we want to ensure that it continues to improve and that it's inclusive for all of the representative bodies, all the SNAs and all the SETs, as well as the students. So that's very important. In relation to the Parents' Council, I love the fact that you've once again engaged with students and parents and families. I love the fact that there's a survey there and there's actual information that can be presented. You're not just coming with a point to prove or making a statement. You've actually done the work, and you must be complimented for that. And it's just because you're actually the parents' representatives. You have down there about many felt supports, and this is in relation to the SETs, but many felt supports should be allocated on a basis of individual need, and that current arrangements do not always reflect the reality of children's experiences in the schools. And we all know that there's a delay in the allocation of resources. We all know that sometimes schools don't get the resources that they want, but they make do with what they get. But from your own point of view, your associate, did you ask any questions in relation to the impact on other students in the class environments at the delayed response of allocation of resources?
So we wouldn't have gone into talking about delayed responses, but we did ask parents of children who didn't have special education needs about the importance of the set and the SNA in the class, and they overwhelmingly, the ones that answered that were, they felt that that was for all children in the school, that those people, those additional people were there and working with children. It impacted their children as much as it impacted the child with SEN. But I just think when we're talking about resources as well, it's not always bodies. I mean, because we did the survey, but obviously we're working with parents every day in really difficult circumstances at times. And some of them, it's not about more bodies, it's about the experience and the understanding of the people that are there. And that's why we really welcome the SNA review, because I think the training element of that and that will raise that tide. Lots of parents talk about SNAs as their child's person in school and their advocate and the child's voice in the school. So it's very, very well respected. But I think the fact that when we talk about resources, we need to talk about more than just numbers of people, that we need to talk about what those people have engaged with in terms of education and training, and how they're supporting the children in the class, because quite often there's bodies there. It's just the knowledge of those bodies that are there is meaning that children are maybe more dysregulated, they're struggling, and I think the SNA communication piece will really help with that, and the behavioural regulation piece will really help with that, because SNAs really are seen as very crucial to that. So the expansion of that will make, I think, a huge difference. So, and I don't mean bodies disrespectfully, but we do just often count the numbers of SNAs in the system, the numbers of SETs in the system. But I think we need to say, well, what do those people need to do their job effectively as well?
Yeah, to support them doing their job. Okay. And I haven't got to the end of the actual survey, and okay. I started going through and I started looking at the individual. But where the parents did say should the allocation be on an individual basis, did you make an individual recommendation on that point?
No, I mean, I think the main thing around the allocation was that parents felt that it should be more transparent. So they didn't know why their child had or hadn't got an allocation. So they felt that they should be more included in the decisions, and that their viewpoint should be taken into consideration around allocation as well. So a lot of it was around the transparency of understanding the decisions that were being made.
So it comes back to Justin's communication point as well. Okay, thank you very much. The next speaker is going to be Deputy Cathal Crowe. You can come up here. Okay, perfect. Oh, no problem. Deputy Ruth Coppinger.
Thank you. Thanks and welcome, and thanks for your presentations. Yeah, I just wanted to, Jessalyn, ask about the recent, I suppose, attack on SNAs that the government announced, that led to a huge reaction. And I made the point, I think it was last week, we had speakers in as well from Forza. And actually, sometimes you need a reaction to get people to act. And overall, it's actually led to some good developments. Which I think you mentioned earlier on in terms of the circular and the professional development and maybe more security for SNAs in jobs as well. So I just want to ask you about the circular, because I know Save Our SNAs had a really strong campaign on this, and it's obviously paid dividends. So could you tell us a little bit about why you did that and about your campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the circular that was in place, it was very closed-ended. It based the allocation of SNAs within schools basically down to physical care needs, so the likes of toileting, feeding and medical care, which left out a huge cohort of children and young people. So we're seeing so many more children now coming into the system. We see with the fight for special school places and for autism classes and all of these things, that there are neurodivergent children, there are children that wouldn't tick the boxes of needing support with toileting, feeding or medical. So we really wanted to campaign around communication and regulation. Communication, because we have so many children who either are pre-speaking or non-speaking, but also because when children become dysregulated, they can't speak, they can't vocalise their fears. And SNAs work with those children every single day. And we thought that those children needed to be respected and to be given the support that they deserve. Also with regulation, obviously the Relate framework was released quite a while ago now, which is, I think any SNA or teacher working in the system will tell you, is absolutely phenomenal. But the finances, the the resources aren't being put into our schools to train staff on this and how to do it properly. And if we had that regulation first system within our schools, it would make such a difference to children across the board, whether it's a deaf school, whether it's a private school, whether it's an autism class, or whether it's mainstream. That regulation first piece would make children so much happier, so much more regulated within classrooms, and then happier going home as well, which is a big piece for our neurodivergent children.
Thanks. And just another thing that you mentioned in your statement is that no parent should have to go to court to get the right to education or therapies for their children. Like, I hear about this an awful lot from parents, and I have to put parents in touch with solicitors as well who take cases. There seems to be a history in this country of the government, the state, no matter what government is there, defending and then only paying out or whenever they need to. We've even seen it in relation to people who suffered abuse in schools. But yeah, so what's been your own experience of, for people you know, like having to go through that process?
Yeah, so a very good friend of mine had to sleep out. We had sleep outs last year, looking for school places for their children, which is absolutely diabolical. I'm contacted by parents quite a bit, especially now since the Save Our SNAs campaign, reaching out looking for support because assessments of needs are taking years. They haven't got school places. I've already got a parent, a neighbour of mine, contact me because they've no school place for next year, and the primary school has already told her there's no point applying. You know, so we're hearing of this far too often, and parents shouldn't have to be taking cases to court, and they absolutely shouldn't have to be doing sleep outs outside the Department of Education to try and make sure that their child has a school place. It's diabolical.
Especially courts are very intimidating for people as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah, just maybe to finish with the National Parents Council. So yeah, I looked through the survey that you had there about the allocation of special education teachers and people's dissatisfaction around that. So one of the things that you say is parents felt there was insufficient set hours available. Schools are forced to prioritise children with the most significant need, and they expressed concern about the inequalities from school to school. And they called for increased set allocations and greater transparency and a stronger focus on individual need. Would you have any idea how many more special education teachers you think might be needed throughout the system, or have you?
No, we wouldn't have any data on that, but it is something that comes up regularly from parents to us, is that their children don't just go to a specialist placement for minding. They want them to have an education as well, and obviously that's where a set teacher comes in, but also in mainstream as well. It's not just about managing behaviour and regulation, it's actually about their access to the curriculum as well across mainstream and specialist placement. So it comes up time and time again, which is, I think, why it came up in the survey that parents were raising this as an issue. It's part of the education system that they really value, and I think that bit that a child has to disimprove to get something is the problem. That the early intervention would have been, you know, maybe meant that the intervention may have not been needed as long because there would have been an earlier intervention. So I think that's the issue the parents were raising.
Okay, thank you. I'm up next to myself. Again, thank you all of you for coming in today. Just my first question is. Like, we've been pretty well briefed across the last week now on what's in line for everyone who works in special education and SNAs in particular. Just want to ask, do you feel in that process you've all been adequately consulted? Might start with Ms. Henry.
I mean, yes. I mean, Forza have reached out to every SNA in the country. They've offered information meetings, pretty much 2 or 3 a day, depending on where they are, some online, in person, to hear the voices of SNAs, to explain the new contract and circular to them. And they've done that throughout the process. In fairness, the last 2 years of the Workforce Development Plan, Forza have regularly updated the members on what's happening. It's been a slow process. And I think some SNAs may feel that they didn't feel represented in in some of the forums that they had, that the department held to hear SNA voices, because only one SNA could attend from each school. So lots of SNAs, especially if it was a large school, you know, if it was a special school with 40 or 50 SNAs, one SNA was dependent on bringing all of those voices out. So that might have been a difficulty, but absolutely since the release of the circular and contract, of course I haven't done enough, I have to say, or have done like above enough,
Sure.
To reach out to members.
Of course, that's good to hear. And yourself?
Yes, I suppose as a national body, we've been consulted all the way through on this. CAMA was on the SNA Workforce Development Plan. We're on a special ed forum. We're a stakeholder in the Act, so we're consulted on any policy or legislation change that's there. So I think as a national body, we're very much consulted. I think where the deficit is at the local level in schools and in communities. I think parents don't get the voice that they need to have in a local level. So that transference of being involved very much at a national level and being included doesn't work its way down always within schools. I mean, some schools are doing amazing work in that area, but some schools' parents don't have a voice. For instance, in their child's student plan, they don't have a voice in that. So it can be very variable when it gets further down from the national body.
I might just use that phrase, their voice, because the voice of children, I think, was really well heard. I was out on back Kildare Street, Molesworth Street there when the protests were on. Met many parents who were advocating for their children. Their SNAs were out, their teachers. The children's voice was very heard. But can I go back to Jessalyn for a moment? So I want to focus on the SNA. I know the SNA kind of comes secondary to child. We're all talking about the child here, but can I just ask about people going into the profession? What we heard in the briefing was they would love to stabilise their workforce. They would love to get to a point where people have a full lifelong career as an SNA, where they can go into the bank like anyone else and without hassle draw down a mortgage. Do you think this will stabilise the work environment for people who work as SNAs? And do you think we'll start seeing a change in the profile of people working as SNAs? Because what I saw when I was teaching, and I for a short period worked as an SNA, there's a gender imbalance is one thing, and you don't always address these things fully. But the other thing was very few people in their 20s, school leavers, go into this and stay in it for life. Someone taps them on the shoulder and says, "Oh, you're doing very well. Why don't you become a teacher?" That's not what we want. We want people to choose an SNA career that's viable, pays well, is appreciated, and it's lifelong. I'm just wondering, do you feel that's going to be secured here to some degree?
I absolutely, with the fact that redeployment has now been brought in, absolutely that will secure SNAs, the workforce there. We're not going to lose valuable, educated SNAs with so much experience because their school loses an SNA. And they haven't been able to get another job. So we will absolutely see that stabilised. Are we going to get to a point where we see SNAs coming straight from school? I would love to see school leavers being able to see being an SNA as a career opportunity and to be able to go into college and do those courses. At the moment, it's not really possible. And it still tends to be people that are raising their families and they're doing a career change.
Could I just ask you one more question then? Just your opening statement was very compelling, and I would agree with a huge about what you said. But you mentioned that SNAs should be empowered through training and collaboration to work as valued members of the educational team. And I know it's been a bugbear. Some SNAs would feel that their role is to support a child, and yet they're sometimes set off tidying bookshelves or doing menial jobs that they're not supposed to be doing. Do you think going forward that we will move to a model somewhat like the UK, where we'll actually see teaching assistants in classrooms that have an educational role, supporting the teacher in the room, not just supporting one or two children in the room?
I think that's a bigger conversation to have, and it's something for further down the road. Is there a place for care needs and for SNAs to be educational as well? Absolutely, I think so. And I think, a lot of SNAs help educationally anyway, whether we're supposed to or not. So yeah, I would love to see a different kind of a system set up. And again, it would depend on those opportunities of educationally. I would love to see an apprenticeship scheme set up so that can work with teachers, we can work with SET, and it would see those young people who have depended on SNAs for so long, maybe they would go into the role. How much of a difference would they make to children with similar disabilities to themselves to be able to share their experience and their knowledge? I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be an incredible place if we could get to that point. Thank you very much. I'll come in later in a second round of questions. Next up is Deputy Catherine Callan, please.
Margaret Keirlock, and thank you all for being here today and bringing all your very valuable experience and knowledge with you. My apologies for being late. I was at another committee meeting. I have a number of questions, so maybe it's best if I just ask them and then you'll have time to come back then, if that's okay. So in terms of the redeployment scheme for SNAs in particular, I'm going to focus as well more so on the SNAs. And I think it's been broadly welcomed, but for me, and it's something that I brought up with both Ministers for Education, the Minister Hildegarde Naughton and Minister Michael Moynihan as well, in terms of while an SNA's role on paper is the same in a mainstream classroom as it is in a special education, or not even in a special education classroom, and also then in a special school. But special schools, in my experience, particularly the ones in my constituency in Kilkenny and Carlow, they have an awful lot of long-term sub-SNAs that would have been in their school for 5-6 years and they're almost like permanent members of staff. And the redeployment scheme as it sets out, granted it does absolutely offer great job security for SNAs, and as a former SNA myself I welcome it hugely, but I just think that there is a space there for SNAs in special schools to our principals just to have a little bit more autonomy when it comes to when there's a vacancy, an SNA vacancy in their schools. That's my first one, what your thoughts are on that one. And then how important is I already know the answer to this, but I would like to hear from yourselves how important assault leave is for our SNAs and our teachers too. And then in terms of, I think it's my understanding somewhere in the back of my mind, and even from speaking with my SNA colleagues my former colleagues over the weekend, multidisciplinary teams. If they were in our schools, what difference they would bring to our support they would bring for our SNAs and our SET teachers, but also, and of course at the centre of all of this, we are keeping the child, aren't we? Even though I know I'm speaking about SNAs and special education teachers, but really the difference, the impact, the positive impact that would have on our children in school, and then obviously by extension family and home life as well. For SNAs, the new workforce plan, the circular, the redeployment plan, it's bringing a lot of professionalism to the role of an SNA. And I do welcome the fact that SNAs are being encouraged to upskill, to take training courses, to do all of that sort of good stuff. I wonder what your feelings are on the EPV days that teachers can get if they do an approved summer course. Do you think that would be, once again I know the answer, well I feel like I know what the answer is, or what my former colleagues would say, but I'd like to know what you think about having those EPV days as well available for SNAs who do a summer course. And then finally, how much time have I got left? Finally then, for advice, any advice you might give or support that you might give to a parent who is seeking a special school placement for their child. This person that I'm thinking of specifically, their child is already in special education classroom in a mainstream school. It's insufficient for his needs. He's probably only doing 1 hour a day now. And the advice for the parent, she's not fussy at all where she'll go. She'll travel just to get the proper education for her child. But the advice that came down from NEC and from the CNO was, maybe consider homeschooling. So what supports we could get there, please.
Okay. So I've probably mixed these up and they're probably not in order, but I'll do my best. EPV days, yes, I mean, they would be fantastic. You would see SNAs really, they would all sign up. I can't see anybody that wouldn't sign up over the summer months if they thought they were going to get EPV days. But it's also, it's about fairness. We're all working with the same children, in the same circumstances, in the same building. So those kind of rights should be across the board, I feel. It's similarly, it was only brought in about a year ago, I think, about SNAs having the same rights to represent their country in a sporting event, whereas teachers have already had that. SNAs at the moment are not given leave if they're a councillor in a county or city council, whereas teachers can't take those leaves. So I think if things like that, including the APV days, were brought in, well then it would absolutely level the playing field, and it would be less of an us and them kind of situation among staff. I feel. In terms of assault leave, I mean, I was in here when the new assault leave went through the Shannon, and will be coming to second stage, I believe, soon. It would be a game changer. It's absolutely essential. We've had so many cases. I've been assaulted, and I use that because I don't like to use the term assault. There is assault in schools, but what is experienced by SNAs in a lot, yes, in legal terms it's assault, but actually it's dysregulation by those students. So, like, that's really important to recognise. So yeah, it absolutely needs to be looked at, and that bill that went through the Shandon will become to second stage is really, really important, and I would love to see that being passed. Such an amount of work went into that. Multidisciplinary teams, I mean, it'd be a game changer. We have so many children that aren't accessing therapies and supports at the moment, whether that's speech and language, whether that's physiotherapy or occupational therapy. To have those in our schools, I mean, those children will have the supports that they absolutely need, and means that they would be able to grow into, you know, fantastic young men and women who can live their lives in any way that they see fit.
Not your fault, that's my fault. I asked too many questions. We might get them in the second round.
Yeah,
if that's
absolutely,
okay, we
absolutely.
can come back to it.
On the last of your questions, if you
Very-
want to
very
put them in
briefly,
touch
if
with
you
the
can.
National Parents Council, we can support that parent.
Thank you. That is so helpful. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Deputy Jen Cummins, Shane O'Malley-Lidall.
Margaret, and you're all very welcome here, and particularly my colleague, Councillor Henry. It's great to have you here, and all the work that you're doing on this issue, all of you. And I think the thing that I'm hearing from everybody today is that there is so much yet to be done to make sure that we actually do have inclusive education, as opposed to just having special education, which is language that I think we need to put into the past and leave it there, and move towards inclusive education. I'm particularly interested in two issues, and the first one is early intervention classes. I had a meeting with a number of parents and schools recently where they're telling me that their early intervention classes in schools are being closed, and that's to make room for special classes within the schools that the early intervention classes are going. And I am concerned about that, because a bit like the SNA cuts that were going to happen earlier in the year, we haven't got the system fully in place yet. So, you know, cutting things before we have everything ready, like the workforce development plan, like the circular, all those things, that's a step ahead. I think the cutting of these early intervention classes is a mistake, because where are those children going to go? And how are they going to be school ready? How are they going to be life ready? That's part of the process. My understanding from the people who work there is that this means that a child has a better chance of succeeding in school and being ready to be there when they come into school, to come into the formal part of the school. So what is your view of early intervention classes being closed? And then the second question I have is, with regards to the summer programme debacle, really, I mean, we are literally limping from one disaster to another in inclusive education this year. And I think the summer provision, it's like every single time this year there's been something gone wrong. It's like it was the first time that we were running it and we had to learn from our mistakes, but it's been running for decades. So I just can't understand how it's gone so drastically wrong this year. And leaving it so late is one of my things. That I think it might be that it was left so late in the year for the portal to be open to people to register. That's a mistake. But also there's the huge increase in numbers. But they knew that by the portal closing on the 1st of October. They knew how many children were going to be in the system.
So I just don't understand, one hand's not talking to the other. So I'm just wondering what your view of the overall, I suppose the bigger picture of why it went wrong. So the two questions are early intervention classes, what do you think about them closing? And then the second one is, what do you think was the challenges for summer provision this year? Thank you.
I'll take the early intervention one first. I mean, it's an awful scenario because it's like that, which child do you pick? Do you pick the child who needs a special class and there's no special classes, or do you pick the child who needs the early intervention? And you want to pick both. But I think sometimes when you're looking at these situations, like, we need to look at our early years and why, if we're talking about inclusion, those children should be in the early years sector and supported and catered for. And I suppose our early years sector isn't at the level that inclusion even is at primary. So because we've got quite a private early years sector, there are different I suppose, parameters of control over that sector, and that creates a problem. So we would know, because we cover early years, primary and post-primary, we would have parents who call our helpline of children in early years who have disabilities and they have not been able to find any place near them that will take them. There isn't that reassurance that if there's as in primary, if there's a space, then your child is entitled to it. That's not the case in the early years sector. So I think if we're trying to build an inclusive system, we need to address that in our early years sector. All of these children should be with their peers and grow up and be educated with their peers, the children that live around their home, that they become friends with and develop with. So I think if you're talking about inclusion and not SEN, then that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the possibilities for these children within their communities to be educated with their peers, and therefore those children should have provision within the early years sector, would be the National Parents Council's point of view on that, and that all children should be included and not excluded. So I think that's really important. On the summer programme, yeah, I mean, we were very concerned at the lateness. I think one of the really good things is that schools are very prepared. They do a lot of preparation for summer provision. They know that it's coming. So thankfully, because schools work like that, a lot were ready straight away to, and then the reopening, they were, but we shouldn't find ourselves in positions that we do. And as you say, we know these things are coming down the track. I think the increased numbers of children who need a specialist placement needs to be reviewed. I mean, I think that really significantly needs to be reviewed. There's children, the increase in numbers has happened in the last number of years that's beyond any other previous increase. And I think when you think those children are probably our COVID babies, and what they experienced at that time with not having public health nursing, maybe missed developmental assessments, and were in homes without other children and parents who were working online, I think we need to see maybe how that impacted. Are these children with special education needs, or do they need interventions around developmental delays? And we need to work out what the appropriate interventions are for these children, because I think if it's around the developmental needs, that's a targeted intervention that is for a specific period of time, and the children can work through that, rather than put them into a system that's very, I suppose, developed around SNAs and set teachers, which wouldn't have necessarily the expertise that those children need around developmental. So it's a bit of a left field way of answering that, but I think they're some of the things we need to look at.
Yeah, the early intervention classes closing is awful, and we're also seeing, I have a number of schools in my area that have early start classes or early years classes, and they're starting to close. And 3 particular primary schools close to me, they've all closed now for September. So there's parents now that those children will not have an early years place to go to as well. And it's because of the lack of space for an autism class. We need to be looking at disability, neurodiversity across the board. And we need to be looking at what we can do. If we're talking about an inclusive education system, it shouldn't be just based on one particular cohort. We need to be looking across the board and seeing what we can do on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Senator Pauline Tully, please.
Taoiseach, and apologies I had to go up and speak in the Shannon, but I did read your opening statement and I was here for some of the first one there. So I apologise also if I'm going to ask a question maybe that other people have asked. But we had unions in here last week which represent both teachers and SNAs, and a lot of what they're saying you're saying as well, like the basic training, continuous professional development and specialised training, and I suppose what they want is the recognition, or to recognise that qualification as well. I'm just wondering, in all of your interaction, your surveys there, was there much discussion on the principles of the school? Because I suppose what I find is some schools are excellent at inclusion, and you've got a whole team approach, and you've got every member of staff, if the principal is leading that. And then you'll have other schools where there seems to be a lack of understanding, where students are often told, you know, put on a half day, need to go home, can't cope, and no effort made to cope. I wonder, you know, is there more education needed for principals on inclusion, or did you find that, or have you any opinion on that?
Yes, I mean, parents did mention that in the survey. They mentioned it around, I suppose, the principals, I suppose the culture in the school around their involvement as a parent in decision making and being heard in terms of the needs of their child. So they would have mentioned that, and it would have come up as part of the issue, that there was a lack of transparency in decisions and things like that. But I suppose we work all the time with parents of children with special education needs, that the issue around the leadership in the school, because it's not often just the principal, it's a leadership team. And absolutely you would see differences in that, where there might be a change in principal in a school and the whole culture in the school has changed, either positively or negatively. So it clearly is a significant issue. I think there's a lot impacting leadership in schools at the moment. Inclusion is one of them, but there's many, many other things. So I would absolutely support any education provision for leadership around inclusion, and I think there already is provision, but having that more. And I mean, it's interesting with the new SNA piece that the training will be mandatory for SNAs. That will mean that that's the only person in the school where education is mandatory for. CPD is mandatory now for SNAs. There's nobody else in the school where CPD will be mandatory. Now, there are arguments about for and against mandatory as well and what that brings. But I mean, I think that's a discussion that should be had as well in light of all the additional needs that come into schools. I don't mean children's needs, but just general needs within a school setting and leadership role. So I think that's a discussion that needs to be had as well.
I really feel there is a need for training, and possibly mandatory, because I was a teacher myself for many years, and I was the SENCO in the school, and you'd organised CPD for all of the staff, and you had staff that were excellent and who were really engaged and wanted to know as much as possible so that they could help the students in their class. But you also had staff who did not want to know, who only wanted an easy life, A students, you know, and didn't want any issues at all of any sort. I'm not even talking about additional learning needs. They just didn't want any behavioural issues, anything at all. So, you know, the mandatory training, I think, is really important. And I think the fact that they're going to introduce teacher training, that you have to do a section of it in a special school setting or a special class setting, is welcome, because I hope that that would then, you know, open people's eyes to what's actually required and included. The INTO had a suggestion that you put a set teacher into every mainstream class, and obviously reduce class sizes as well. That was one of their calls. All of the teacher unions were calling for reduction in class sizes, which we support. But they were saying in some regions, other jurisdictions, they have a set teacher in the mainstream class. So they're team teaching, basically, and picking up on all of these. I'm just wondering if you have your opinion on that. Like, so they don't have special classes as such, or not as many anyway, and there still could be withdrawal for additional support and resource, but I just know what would the opinion of that? Would there be a lack of confidence for that?
Well, on that, I've often shared a classroom with co-teaching teachers, a set and a mainstream teacher, and it works very, very well. I don't know whether it would work in every classroom, and it would be dependent on the needs. I absolutely think if we're talking about an inclusive system, we will still absolutely need special classes. Maybe that would reduce the numbers. It would really come down to the needs of the children that in the school and in those particular classrooms. But I mean, any help that is given, any extra support in a school for our children, whether it's children with educational needs or whether it's children because they're struggling with home or mental health or whatever it is going to be beneficial. So it's definitely something I wouldn't be objecting to.
I think as well, though, we need to decide what a set teacher is. So what are the additional qualifications? Are there additional qualifications? Or is it what you're talking about, it's just a co-teaching team? So I think there's a piece there that if we're calling it a set, then it has to, we need to look at what that should require, because at the moment there's a lot of sets that have additional qualifications, but there's also ones that don't. And don't have experience either. So I think we need to have that discussion as well.
Yeah, exactly. I know you're talking, oh no, sorry.
If you want to squeeze in another question, about 40
Just
seconds.
on the early intervention and early years and the closure of those very vital supports, is it, you said lack of space, is that the main reason you're hearing for the lack?
Yeah, a lot of those settings that are in schools are closing because they need the space. Schools will be allocated an autism class or a special class, but they're not being given the funding for a modular. So the best way of doing it is, I'm sorry, but the early years setting has to go, which is not fair.
Very good. Senator Shane Curley, please.
Well, look, thanks to everyone for coming in today and for the presentations. I suppose, look, I know there's been kind of a back and forth today about the kind of level of qualification that you would make mandatory for SETs. My own view, if you want to be a guidance counsellor, you have to go and do a postgraduate diploma or a master's. And I know there's a bit of debate on that, but my view would be that a guidance counsellor, the role of an SET is equally as impactful, if not more impactful, on the children they're dealing with in a very, I suppose, intimate setting where it's 4 to 6 kids per class max. Would you not think that on that basis alone, there should be a level of skill set there that's equal to the master's level that is required from guidance counsellors?
And look, I think we go back too much sometimes to, okay, we need to hire qualifications, we need to increase qualifications. Lots of our teachers, our SNAs, lots of people across the board have learned on placement, working through the sector, and have found the best ways to go forward. So I don't necessarily feel that it should be a master's qualification, but we need to look at other ways of getting people into the system that have the qualifications needed, or that have the experience more so needed to work with our vulnerable cohorts.
I mean, it's touching on and Justin has touched on it as well. There's the practicality of it, but also there's the understanding of behaviour that doesn't come from just experiencing it, that comes from a theoretical framework and background. So absolutely that is needed as well. But I suppose I'm not an expert in terms of deciding whether it's masters or postgraduate or whatever it is, but for what we hear from parents, it's maybe a modular approach is more appropriate, because what you're doing then is you're making sure that the set teacher working in their particular environment is experienced and qualified in that particular environment. And I suppose we don't want something that completely backlogs the system, that we can't get people going into set because the qualifications are so high, they don't want to go back and do a master's, yet they're very happy to work in the area and like working with those. So we have to balance, and that's not to say that's a reason not to increase qualifications, but it's how we do that that has the greatest impact for the child, not just saying it's a master's course. So, but I think maybe a modular system where people can get credits and build those would allow both that increased knowledge and experience at the same time.
Yeah.
But also we don't want to rule anybody out because of socio-economic, because of their religion, because of their nationality. And at the moment those people could be left out because, if I have to do a master's, I'm going to need X amount of money, and they haven't got it.
No, I take that point, yeah, that is fair.
We need to look at that too.
Yeah, I understand that. I was, I suppose, a bit worried earlier on to hear that in some cases students are still coming out of initial teacher education courses without really doing a module in inclusive education. I did myself. I was a secondary teacher. I did do it. Now, it was fairly light touch in the overall scheme of the 2 years at the PME I did. It was a one module, one semester course that I did, one lecture a week. I don't know if that fully equipped me to walk into a classroom and be all-inclusive to all children's needs. Is it time, number one, to make sure that it's mandatory on every initial teacher education course, and to mandate the higher education colleges to make sure that it's on their curriculum? And secondly, if you take, I suppose, sometimes the NQT coming into a school with limited life experience isn't the best person to always put into a special education classroom environment. And sometimes it's the more experienced teachers that get put in, and that's fair. But they're definitely the teachers that don't have that theoretical background. Is it time to make CPD mandatory for teachers the same as SNAs, as well as maybe making the initial teacher education mandatory as well?
I think if you're going to make it CPD mandatory for SNAs, it should be mandatory across the board. Absolutely. SNAs will absolutely be there for inclusion and whatever, but the teacher is ultimately the one that's running the classroom, and the principal is the one running the school. So it comes from a top-down approach. It never comes from the bottom up. So we need to be looking at that. But yeah, absolutely, CPD is much needed.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the initial teacher education, I don't know, but it may have been the time that that person did their training, because it now is a requirement of the Teaching Council that teaching education has a mandatory special ed module and placement.
So you would think that there's no teacher coming out of any of the colleges now that doesn't have at least some exposure to it?
Some exposure, but it's what exposure is the question, and I think some people may have done that in a mainstream class, and how inclusion works in a mainstream class, which is really important too. But then that student may come straight out of college and go into a special school that they've never walked inside a door of a special school before, and the first time they do, they have a class there. So, you know, that can be traumatic for the teacher, but it also can have a very negative impact for the children. And we're seeing that more and more, that NQTs are coming and going into into special schools with very little experience or exposure to that teaching. So yeah, it is an issue.
I think even in the mainstream classroom setting, the amount of damage that a teacher can do if they're not equipped with the skill set to cater for the needs of children around the classroom, the amount of damage they can do if they go into a classroom and do the wrong thing purely through a lack of training, it can be so damaging to a child. I think we need to be so careful to make sure that it is mandated as a CPD element as well for every teacher across the country, and I'd look forward to working with you maybe on that as we go forward. Gormagov.
Okay, very good. Just before we have our second round of questions, we'll have 3 minutes per member, but just this whole idea of to what extent teachers are prepared leaving the training colleges, it's come up many times over. Can I suggest to members that we would invite maybe in September the teacher training colleges in here to talk about teacher training, CPD, and how they prepare undergraduates and those in their postgraduate courses for this work environment. So would we agree to that? If we agree, it gives our Secretariat scope to start preparing for this for September. Would there be general agreement on that?
Agreed. The one thing I might suggest,
yes.
here, look, if that's okay, the HEA and the Teaching Council will be two bodies you would definitely need to bring in on that one. I think bringing in individual teacher training colleges, this is probably a one-size-fits-all approach that we're trying to bring in, that we have a kind of a standardised training across the board. Probably be,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could combine this. Would there be agreement that we combine HEA and the teacher training colleges? And it's been a reoccurring theme. I've heard many members raise this. I think there's merit to bringing them in September if there's agreement.
So CAME are the standards that need to be raised, so that I think it's important that they're there as well to represent.
Okay. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Great, excellent. Okay, second round of contributions. First up, we've Senator Pauline Tully again. 3 minutes, please.
No, I just really think it's a really important discussion to have about inclusive education going forward, because as you say, with more and more children, presenting with different issues, and as COVID's had an impact, and then I think the lack of interventions in community is having a huge impact as well. And I hear from schools, that they would have had support maybe years ago from the early development or child development teams, and that's not there anymore. They're not getting any support. have you had any experience of the therapies being offered in schools? You know, and how is that working? Is it making a huge difference?
Yes, I think again it can sometimes go down to leadership, that piece. So some schools work very closely with their CDNT teams, and then some schools don't have a CDNT team with many people in it. So there can be, but it can go to that sense of in how much partnership do schools open up to in terms of how they work with parents, with therapeutic services outside in the community or within. But I suppose the therapies in schools is being rolled out in September, but there's some schools that have already had it from the... So I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, one of the difficulties is we're coming from the same pool of therapists. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I know the Department and the Department of Health are working closely together on that. But I think once the recruitment start and see how that plays out in terms of CDNT teams that are already struggling to get therapists for their teams, and now education teams that will be setting up as well. But we, like 120% support the therapists in school, because that's where children are. That's where children are all day. So the services should be where they are, not bringing children out of school to get... And also making sure that the professionals who are working with the children in the school setting are hearing what the therapists are saying as well, will hopefully help. And it will be important to make sure that parents are included in that as well, in terms of planning and student support plans and the rest, the parents' involvement in that, and students where possible too.
Coming from Cavan, the CDNT in Cavan is very poorly staffed. I think we're missing about 1/3 of the staff. So a lot of the children are not getting any intervention, and there's no support going into the schools. Like, I can recall when I was teaching some years ago, when students were transitioning from primary to secondary school, the child development team would be in contact. They would tell you, right, who's coming into your particular school, what their needs are, even simple things just to say, you know, a colour code, a timetable, or a locker at the side at eye level, or, you know, things that you little small simple things that made a huge difference, you know, and just giving you some background on the children, which just helped the children to actually settle into school, and that's missing now.
Well, what we're seeing now is that SNAs in secondary schools are trying to fill in that gap. So during June, and we've done it ourselves for the last number of years, is we would go to the primary schools, talk to the SNAs and the teachers, observe the child that's coming over to us and find out what works for them. And so again, it's the SNA that's trying to fill that gap. Again, to help with those transitions. So it's really important that the therapists are in schools to assist.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. I'm up next myself. I directed a lot of my questions to Jess in the last round. I might go to the National Parents Council, if that's okay. You mentioned in your opening statement that there's a large degree of confusion among parents as to how SNA allocations are made, and I would agree with that. And who can blame them? They have enough battles on the horizon trying to support their child, and yet the terms for how SNA allocations are made seem to change by the year anyway. Just want to ask you, could you elaborate a little bit on that, and would you suggest a way that what kind of communication could there be, or is there something lacking in terms of circulars or information from the department, or is it at grassroots school level that this could be improved?
I think a lot of it is at grassroots school level. Yeah. So as you see from the opening statement, a lot of parents are happy with their allocation, both in SAT and SNA. So it's where the parents who weren't happy have reported this. And I think that's often where parents are happy. It's when they're working in partnership with the school, where there's conversations about their children's needs, when they're being... Because, I mean, some children may not have an SNA, and the school may be very clear that that's not the provision that they need something different. But because the parent doesn't know that, they haven't had that conversation, they just think because their child hasn't got an SNA, then there's something there that they haven't got that they need. So it's the partnership that makes a huge difference. So if there's an explanation about what their children's needs are in the school setting, that the school are listening to them around their knowledge of their own child and what makes a difference, and then there's a plan in place that both parents and schools understand and agree, and children where they can be involved as well, then I think those parents are less likely to be unhappy or not understand the allocation process. I think where they're not happy is that they don't even see their student support file.
Can I briefly ask you one other thing? It seems to be very prevalent that children who have the support of an SNA in school, there's a tendency to kind of wean them off as they go up through 5th and 6th class, and very often they're not sanctioned for any SNA posts in second level. Do you think that's right? And are we trying to stick rigidly to something that maybe doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the child as they go through adolescence?
I think it's, as every child is different, and I think we need to personalise that more maybe, because parents would say to us at times that we'd equally have parents saying to us, I don't want my child going with this, and the child doesn't want it. They don't want the provision going with them because they're going to secondary school now, they want to be independent. But then we'd also have parents who are saying that was just kind of a blanket decision. Nobody actually looked at the needs of my child. So I think we need to be very individualised about those decisions.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Next up is Deputy Catherine Callaghan. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I suppose when we're talking about inclusive education, I wonder in terms of what your opinion might be about incorporating biodiversity education. You know, I recently attended a very, very interesting conversation about having, or a seminar, I should say, about having nature more present in schools. And I kind of put forward the suggestion that we have lots of sensory rooms, beautiful sensory rooms that are really, really needed. You know, but nature can be, it's such a sensory experience. And I think when we get our children in the garden, that there is less difference. You know, that everybody kind of, now, and I do understand about, for some, they mightn't like the sense of touch, but they might like the sense of the wind in their face or being outside and all of that sort of stuff. And so my question is, what do you think of that as an idea?
Well, it's interesting because I think that schools do a huge amount of work in this area. We have an innovation award every year that schools can apply for, and I think the last 2 years school sensory gardens have been part of the winners of the award. So it's not only that schools are valuing it, we're valuing it as well when we see it. And I think a lot of schools are building sensory gardens as well as rooms in their schools, and not only special schools, but I think mainstream schools are doing it as well. So it does seem to be something that is gathering a lot of support in schools. It's a really nice way as well sometimes the Parents Association to work with the school as well. So it brings that partnership into it. But I think there is a growing acceptance of the fact that even the smells that might be in a garden equally can upset some children, but also calm other children. So there's obviously different areas needed. But yes, I think it is. And nature just generally. I mean, we're starting to see forest schools come into Ireland, but I mean, they're very mainstream in other jurisdictions. So I think that whole understanding of our environment and how the part that plays in regulation for children, all children, is really important.
Children and adults, we're of nature. So nature is soothing.
An example exactly of that in a school I was in Wexford only a few weeks ago, where it was the children who initially said, we want to be outside more, we're not outside enough. And they've now got a plan. They're changing around their playground, but they have a plan that's just grown legs and wings and lots of plants in the meantime, with polytunnels and all kinds of things. But we sold that idea then to another school where they were really looking at inclusion, and they have a number of special classes, and they could all just see how this could be such a fantastic example of inclusion, that the children from the special class would be right beside the children from the mainstream. They were talking about a sandpit as a first step for that, digging down, having it low so it was safe for everybody. And you know, it was all about not plastic toys, but everything that was nature and there, and whatever it was, you know, you could all play together in the sandpit, and such amazing learning going on for everybody. So it's a really popular idea, I think, and hopefully one that will grow.
And we probably need the department to help to support as well in that regard, and plan for green spaces, I think, particularly when we build a new school.
Space is an issue, but it takes planning as well, and partnership is the way to do it, you know, with the children having the idea and then parents getting involved and people from the local community getting involved alongside the teachers and SNAs and everybody in the school.
Yeah,
I think I want to go back to school.
We would be big believers in my most recent school of that. So I've worked in a secondary school for the past 10 years. We have chickens, we have dogs, we have bees. You know, we go out every February and work with other organisations within the community to plant trees and flowers and, you know, paint murals. And it's beneficial to everybody.
Wow. As I say, I want to go back to school.
Sounds absolutely fabulous. Well done. Absolutely. Deputy Darren O'Rourke, please, 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, and sorry I had to step out for questions with the Taoiseach there, so missed some of the hearing, but I'll look back at it. Can I ask maybe the Parents' Council if you're hearing from parents in relation to reductions in allocations in special education teachers, related larger classrooms merging, and then the summer programme, because obviously I think in terms of the SNAs and what we're hearing from government, and there's a pause there, it strikes you as like potentially positive opportunity, and then what I'm hearing on SET allocation, mainstream allocation, and particularly summer programme is exactly the opposite. I don't know if that's been reflected or hearing any of that.
Well, I suppose our experience recently with the summer programme has been very positive. We've been involved with the department and other stakeholders in terms of trying to promote the summer programme, and it has grown over the last number of years quite significantly. I think sometimes the difficulty with the summer programme is that the children need it the most, often are not getting it. That can be a little bit but in special schools where there's children with very complex needs, there needs to be additionality in the summer because the teachers and staff that have been working there need support.
So do you think it's a thing of, it's a victim of its own success? It's got very popular, there's huge demand in relation to it, but also like what it was initially intended for has changed. Do you think there's a need for expanding it or reviewing it or both? Maybe
I mean, I think it's changed because of the needs people have raised with it, and the department have adapted it to work with those needs. I think, yes, I mean, the fact that it even changed from July provision to a summer programme was in response to parents saying, like, this needs to be longer, it needs to be at different times of the year, etc. So it gave that flexibility to it. The fact that it's been extended to include other children as well, it's not just for children with special education needs, again, is from parents saying, my child needs this too. So I think it is a good time to review it, and it is a good time to invest more in it and see it as an essential for some children who really do fall between the cracks over such a long summer period away from education. And teachers and parents will say to you, children were doing so well, and then that big long gap of not learning, when they come back in September, they've regressed so much. For some children, behaviourally, being in groups of children all of a sudden becomes a problem again because they've been maybe at home just with a brother or sister on their own, or whether it's educationally, and they've just regressed so much from where they were when they left the school. So I think it is time for a review of it and an investment in it.
And the piece in terms of home-based tuition, securing teaching support, SNA support, that type of thing, do you think?
You see, because we're in a position at the moment where we're trying to increase the in-school provision, but some children who need it the most aren't getting included in that for the reasons I've suggested. That's still a necessary bridge at the moment. But I think the goal must be for children to be with their peers during the summer. I mean, if you don't have a special education need and you don't have a disability, you're generally out playing with your friends. So the goal is to provide that for children. But I think whilst we haven't got there yet, for all children, there has to be a bridge. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Deputy Jen Cummins, please.
Thank you very much. So I think what I've heard over the last little while is that it needs to be child-centred, and learner-centred, because everybody has. If you've met one child with an additional need, you've met one child. Do you know what I mean? They're not, if this isn't a blanket, everybody's the same. And unfortunately, I think our education system sees systems, it doesn't see individuals. And I know we're saying we want it to be child-centred, but what do you think the reality is actually for young people, for children in schools? Is it child-centred, the education that they're getting? Or are we just trying to, tick loads of boxes at the same time and hope that they fit into one of them? Do you know what I mean? So what do you think for the parents, but also as an SNA, do you think, how far away from being really child-centred are we when it comes to inclusive education?
So the curriculum itself is not child-centred because we don't have the voices of children and young people feeding into that. And we need to, at every stage, we need to be hearing the voices of our children and our young people to the best that we can. in terms of school environments, they are definitely becoming more child-centred. I mean, all we have to look at is the Beacon Alta programmes, you know, and they're based on the student voice. And student voice is becoming much, much stronger in our schools. So in terms of environment, yes, but in terms of curriculum, not so much, and more work needs to be done on that.
I think there has been some efforts recently around the curriculum and young people's voice. I mean, we do have somebody from the student ISSU on the NCCA now, which is a huge change from statutory body. And also the NCCA, when they're developing curriculum, would have network schools where they speak to parents, school staff and students. So there has been improvements in recent years. You can never have enough student engagement in terms of curriculum development, and we always need more. But I also think that there's a lot of changes that have been made that have made us more student-focused and child-focused. But I think until we get proper implementation of things, we won't ever work towards that fully. So, for instance, there's been 2 recent inspectors' reports. One was around admissions in schools and how that they didn't comply with the legislation, and that was reviewed a year later, and still schools didn't comply with the legislation around their admissions policies. So when some schools, and there's not many of them, but when some schools are having policies that are blocking certain children coming into them, that's going to have an impact on how child-focused our system is. And then the other one around student support plans, which are seen as absolutely essential to supporting young people. Again, the inspector's report on that showed that there was a lot of work to do around student support plans. So these are the kind of things that will, particularly the student support plan, if we're involving school staff, parents and students where appropriate, to develop those student support plans. This is where we get real child focus. Like the policies up here will get those systems in place, but until they're implemented fully, we won't truly have a child focused system. So implementation is just as important as the policy and legislative development. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So that concludes our questions. Just before we wrap up, we'd agreed just a short while ago that we would invite the training colleges here and the HEA to talk about all of this and how teachers in particular are prepared. Can I suggest, just if we agree it now, it gives our Secretariat a bit more scope to go and organise this and have it in place. Can I suggest we would firstly do that in September? And could I suggest that the agenda item would be as follows: inclusive education, which provide education and training requirements of SETs and SNAs. We just want to examine how the training and education setup is for those entering SET and SNAs, and we'd have it in September. Is that agreed by everyone?
Could I say?
Yes, Deputy Cummins.
I think it needs to be not just teachers who are going into SET, it's for teachers who are going in.
Teachers full stop, sorry.
Yeah,
yes,
teachers full stop, because I think it's particularly at second level when you might be a subject teacher, you know, you need to have an understanding of, you know, additional needs through no matter what subject you're teaching, and then how it affects how you teach.
Actually, I would agree with that, because you generally train up as a general teacher, and it's somewhere in your career it could be in your classroom every day, or it could be in your secretariat you're assigned into a role.
Absolutely.
So I would fully agree. Is that agreed so for September? I might read that back. So it would be to have an agenda item: inclusive education, education and training requirements at initial teacher education, and also looking at CPD. Okay? So continuous professional development. Just before we conclude, I was in a supermarket there at the weekend, and they've all, as you come in the door, all the thank you teacher cards and the little gifts. But first time I've ever seen thank you SNA, which was nice. I never even thought of, you know, these are things you overlook, but whoever's making these cards or stocking the supermarkets, it's nice that it's one of those things you don't think about till you see it, but it's right there as you come in the door, and finally you can see SNAs are being thanked as well. Hopefully everything we're discussing here today and the workforce development plan, the new circular, hopefully we're getting to a better place for those who work in special education, the parents who have children there, but moreover the children who need and deserve this support. And it was very stirring to see them a few months ago out in numbers, particularly children holding placards up and signs on Molesworth Street. And I think all of us here were down on the street to meet those children, their parents, and to hear their voices. So look, just to, again, on behalf of the committee, thank each and every one of you, and to thank as well the SNAs and other parents that you represent by coming here today. Thank you for your inputs. Sorry. Yeah, so your inputs today and your testimonies have been very insightful and they inform the work of our committee. Our meeting now stands adjourned until Thursday, the 2nd of July, when we'll meet at 9:30 a.m. in private session and then in public. I want to thank the Secretariat, as always, and the technical team for making the meeting possible. Thank you very much.